Okay, welcome back everybody to today's webinar titled Getting Married Young. Okay, so the reason why this topic is relevant right now is because we are busy learning Pirkei Avos, the ethics of our fathers. We learn that between Pesach and Shavuos. Some people learn it even till Rosh Hashanah. And in this coming Shabbos, we're going to be learning chapter 5. And in chapter 5, it goes through a person's lifetime and at what age a person should do what. So it says that when a person is 5 years old, they should learn Chumash. When they're 10 years old, they should learn Mishnah. When they're 15 years old, they should learn Gemara. When they're 18 years old, they should get married. Now, 18 years old sounds pretty young, right? So there's a number of questions here. First of all, is there an advantage of getting married young? Why get married young? But also, why 18? Why the number 18? We all know 18 is Bigamatria Chai, has the numerical value of life. But I mean, why did the sages choose that number to get married? Now, what's important to point out is that most people, even very religious Jews, do not get married at 18. There are people which do, and that's fine. People do what the custom of their community is. And of course, obviously another point that's very important to point out is that obviously marriage needs to be judged on an individual basis. You can't, force somebody to get married because they've hit a certain age. That would be sort of counterproductive. But anyway, that's the age that the Mishnah gives. So first of all, just some interesting, before I get to the explanation of the Mishnah on a halachic and deeper level, there's a very interesting, just to look at some statistics about getting married young. So in terms of people have started to get married older than before, the statistic that I saw was that in the 1970s, 80% of brides were under the age of 25. Now it's 14%. Now that's a huge, huge difference between the 1970s and 2018. That means people are starting to get married a lot older. What is interesting is another interesting statistic that I saw is that the age of getting married actually affects the probability of divorce. So according to one study, that if you get married between the age of 28 and 32, you're a lot less likely to get divorced than someone who gets married younger than that, at least in the first 5 years. So it seems to be that if you get married later, there's less of a probability of getting divorced. But if you think about this, if you put two different statistics together, it's actually very interesting. People used to get married younger and the divorce rate used to be less. So maybe, again, I'm not an expert in marriage or statistics, but maybe it has something to do with us changing, nothing to do with the age. In other words, maybe it's because we have changed, therefore getting married later works better than getting married earlier. But perhaps it didn't used to be that way. Maybe people were different. So that's just a few interesting statistics that you could do with it what you want. But what is interesting, before we get into the number 18 specifically, is that in Judaism we have milestones. Not only 18, we have milestones way before that. Some of them are mentioned in this Mishnah. Some of them are not. Some of them are customs. So for example, there's a milestone called an upshern. An upshern means when a boy turns 3 years old, you cut their hair for the first time. So you'll see a lot of 2.5-year-old boys walking around with long hair. And then when they're 3 years old, suddenly they look like a boy. They look like a little boy. That's one milestone. But then, of course, there's much greater milestones than that, like bar and bas mitzvah. When a girl hits 12 or a boy hits 13, they're halachically now, according to Torah, considered an adult. They're obligated in mitzvahs. Then there's another milestone at 20 years old. It says that a person only becomes liable to be punished when they're 20. So 20, I guess, represents a higher level of maturity, of obligation, of dedication, of responsibility. All of these milestones are very interesting. Wouldn't you say that these things should be judged on an individual basis? Why is Torah giving definitive milestones? When you're 13, you're mature enough to keep mitzvahs. When you're 20, you're mature enough to be liable to be punished. When you're 15, you're mature enough to learn Gemara. When you're 18, you're mature enough to get married. I mean, why is there what seems to be some sort of one-size-fits-all kind of thing, which is a little bit interesting. You would think Judge each child. If a child's not mature enough to keep the mitzvahs, so wait till they're 15. Why does it have to be 13? Perhaps one can say like this. These milestones are not necessarily saying that that is the way a person is. First of all, obviously on a very simple level, these milestones are going on the majority. So the sages saw that the majority of boys are mature at the age of 13. The majority of girls are mature younger at the age of 12. But perhaps one could say on a little bit of a deeper level that these milestones are not actually saying what has happened. In other words, they're not the cause. They're not the effect, they're the cause. Meaning, when you make a milestone, when a child is born, and you've been telling them since then till the age of 12 or 13, that when you become 12 and when you turn 13, you will be responsible as an adult according to Torah law, that itself will produce a maturer 13-year-old. Because the expectancy, what you're expecting from that child is to mature to a certain degree, obviously not fully, but to mature by the age of 13, to be ready to accept upon themselves the yoke of mitzvahs, the yoke of God's commandments at the age of 13 or 12. That itself, that mindset that you educate a child that by the time they reach 12 or 13, they will be obligated, that itself matures them. That itself tells them, you better become an adult by the time you're 12 or 13. Again, not a full-fledged adult. Obviously, there are things that you still cannot do, but an adult regarding responsibility. Take responsibility for your own life. You're not a child anymore. You can't blame everybody else for your problems. You can't just decide one day not to do things. You're responsible. You have to take responsibility for your own life. That message itself matures people quicker. The same thing is going earlier. When you cut a boy's hair at the age of 3, and then suddenly they look like a child, not a baby anymore, that itself makes them a little bit more, it sort of changes them. They're suddenly, oh my gosh, I'm a child now, I'm not a baby anymore. These milestones are the cause for people becoming mature and becoming more responsible. Now obviously it doesn't always work, and obviously there are exceptions, but we're talking about building a culture, building a society. You don't always look into the exceptions. You want to look more at what works for the most part. And therefore, the sages said, when a child reaches 12 or 13, depending on a girl or boy, you will become responsible. That itself perhaps will make that child feel responsible. The same thing one can say, and obviously not in the same way, it's not exactly the same thing, because there's no halacha, they have to get married at 18. No one's forcing anybody, and if they are, they shouldn't be forced to get married. No one should ever be forced to get married. But the fact that the Torah gives a certain age, says, when you're 18, it's time to get married. Perhaps, it's not necessarily the number 18, just the general idea that that you're going to get married at a younger age, not 35, but at your early 20s, whatever the case is, depending on the person, that itself gets you ready for marriage quicker. Now, does that mean that every single person who gets married at 22 is fully ready for marriage? Probably not. And perhaps maybe we need to invest more in getting people ready for marriage, and that's fine, that's perfectly okay. But the very fact that that by the time you're a certain age, you may be married, that itself matures you. That itself tells you, get ready for marriage. Figure yourself out quicker. Don't be, in your late 20s trying to figure out what you want with your life and what your views are and what your morals are, what your values are, which are very important things to decide before a person gets married. Obviously, you want to marry someone with the same values as you, with at least in the general sense, the same mindset on life as you. So that itself tells you, work yourself out a little bit quicker. Try and mature at an earlier age. Now, obviously, and this should be self-understood, obviously, if a person is not mature at a certain age, they obviously should not be getting married, and we should never be forcing people to get married, and if anybody is, they should definitely stop that. But the concept is very powerful. It tells you to take responsibility for the same thing as Bar and Bas Mitzvah, just in the greater sense. Work out your life quicker, that you should live longer as a mature adult, being focused with your values straight, which equals, for the most part, being ready to get married, quicker and earlier. That itself creates that mindset, that itself makes the person ready at an earlier stage. So that's the general concept behind getting married early and expecting people to get married early can be a very good thing. Not always. There are always exceptions to every rule, but can be a very good thing. Why 18? So, again, as I said, most people do not actually follow the number 18, but the Mishnah gives that number, and therefore there obviously must be some significance to it. So there are various insights and hints into the number 18. It says that one explanation that Rashi gives is that from the beginning of the Torah, from the creation of the world, till where it says, Ki me isha lukacha zois, when God created a woman, and said that the reason why she's called a woman, an isha, is because she was taken from a man, Ki me isha lukacha zois. It says the word Adam and Ish 18 times. So from that you see that you need to go through 18 years until you get married. There's another interesting remez hint for this concept, that it's actually in last week's parsha, where it talks about the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, getting married. It says, V'hu bipsuleha yikach, talking about that a Kohen Gadol is commanded to marry someone who's never been married before. And he says, V'hu, meaning, and he shall take her when she has always been unmarried. The word V'hu has the numerical value of 18. So again, you see the concept of getting married at 18. Now, there is an exception that Jewish law gives, and that is if somebody's very busy learning Torah, then they're allowed to push off their marriage. Now, which is part of the reason why it's 18, because, as I mentioned before, the Mishnah goes through when a person is ready to learn certain parts of the Torah. So when you're 5 Chumash, 10 Mishnah, 15 Gemara. Gemara is a very important part of Jewish learning, and therefore you need to leave a number of years while a person is single and their mind is free till they can learn Gemara. The only question is, why not wait till 20 then? Just like you gave 5 years for Chumash, 5 years for Mishnah, you should give 5 years for Gemara. So one of the answers that's given is that it takes a while to become very busy as a result of marriage. In other words, if the person has a few children, then they get very, very busy and overwhelmed. They don't have the same amount of headspace to learn, but that should take a couple of years, and therefore you get married at 18. By the time you're 20, you would have mastered the concept, the part of Torah called Gemara. There's a fascinating explanation from the Maharal. I think this is very, very powerful and says a lot. The Maharal says that when a person is 18, they're fully grown. Now, fully grown, it probably means also physically, but fully grown meaning they're fully mature. Now, why is that significant? So he says, because the concept of marriage, why does a person need to get married? Why is it so important? Because we are told that a person is half a person without marriage. Our souls were split upon birth. One was given to a man, one half was given to a woman, and only when they unite under the chuppah are we really complete. So till we get married, we're half a person. However, before you join your other half, you need to make sure that at least what you have, the half that you do have, is complete. Meaning you've worked on yourself. Obviously, you can always work on yourself more, but to a certain degree, you've completed, you're mature, you're grown, you're ready as a person on your own. Only then you can join another person. Which gives insight into another idea to do with religious people getting married. Religious Jews, tend not to have relationships before marriage. Right? Generally speaking, very religious people do not go to co-ed schools. They remain separate. These boys are separate, girls are separate, and only when they're married do they mix. What's the reason for that? Now, obviously there are many halachic reasons, but one very powerful idea behind that is that you need to give time for both the boy and the girl to work on themselves, to become a complete half before you become a complete person with two, before you connect with your other half. You need to work yourself out without the distraction of a relationship. You need to be a complete person on your own in order to join with another person. And that's where the number 18 come from, says the Maharal. I guess maybe in those days people were fully mature at 18, but the concept is there. That your person needs to fully work on themselves before they join with somebody else to get married. Have a wonderful day.